This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA in full throttle as we now head into the 2017, and we're getting a little bit closer to NBA All-Star Weekend. Top dogs separating themselves from the little fish in the pond, but still enough exciting NBA basketball, especially over this past weekend. So a lot of stuff to discuss. And in order to do that, you know, I got to do it with my right-hand man, 50 grand. NBA aficionado, www.shawsports.net is the place to be. My man, my brother from another mother, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. Are you fully thrusted like our man, Swaggy P?
Yeah, man, I don't know about all that, but salute to all the fans, listeners of NBA Baseline. Thanks so much for tuning in. Another great show on tap, man. As always, we're going to jump right in.
Definitely, man. This week, we've got a very interesting matchup. And maybe we will have an opportunity to see this take place at some point during the season. But if you were to start a franchise in our segment of The Drop, we're going to ask you the question. Who will you got? Giannis Antetokounmpo or the Big Cat? I know people are salivating on and licking their chops on that one. So be ready for our conversation in a few moments regarding that. And our breakdown subject, trade season opens. And the Cleveland Cavaliers have not wasted any time stirring up the pot a little bit with the recent move of Kyle Korver. So we'll also discuss that and some important trade rumors, teams that could be blowing up their rosters. So we'll definitely get into that. And of course, I covered it coast to coast where we discussed the news that's happening in the association. So a lot of stuff to get into. Once again, we appreciate everyone listening to the Baseline NBA podcast. Be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at GameFaceLee. But we always encourage you to get at the show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline, available on all the major platforms: iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Microsoft TuneIn, Player FM, also available on Google Music and the Roku channel. So download any one of these platforms and allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things in the association. Big shout outs to our people, Freeman and Fox, the Sports Brothers. Monday through Friday, they discuss all of the hot topics of South Florida sports, but we also give them the goods discussing the association, so we simulcast through them. So be sure to check out the Sports Brothers as they continue to lean on us to give you what you need to proceed discussing the NBA. You know how we do, and you know how we roll. It's time now for the breakdown. Time to break it down.
Put the bone gristle.
Time now for the breakdown. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. And this week's topic in the breakdown, trade season opens. I kind of feel like Elmer Fudd should be helping do this intro. In this time frame, everybody is hunting for the right player for their team to make the proper push that's going to be needed past the All-Star break. They're in that final stretch, and to level the playing field, to give themselves an opportunity to make a run for either the Cleveland Cavaliers or the Golden State Warriors, or maybe even the San Antonio Spurs or the Toronto Raptors. Any one of these teams will always feel like they need that extra player to give them that extra push. And already the Cleveland Cavaliers feel like their roster is not deep enough. So they go ahead and they pull, I believe, is one of the more improbable trades. It doesn't make too much sense to me, except for the fact that it is the Atlanta Hawks. And it's interesting, Shaw, because we always keep talking about how I feel bad that Atlanta Hawks fan bases seems to always get slammed for not being the most dedicated of fans and not always being the most supportive of their basketball franchise. But then when I see certain moves like this, it really makes it difficult for me to buy into the idea that it's just solely on them. Sometimes when these type of trades take place, it does make you, beg the question, is the franchise actually doing everything in its best interest to make sure that this basketball team will be a successful basketball team moving forward? There being by the movement of Kyle Korver being sent to the Cleveland Cavaliers, their nemesis and enemy in the Eastern Conference. And in return, they get Mo Williams and another player, which I don't even know may actually see significant playing time for the Atlanta Hawks. Just interesting to me, man.
It's tough when you're an Atlanta Hawks fan. I think at this point, this is an organization and a franchise that seems to be going in an opposite direction despite a good record and some a lot of success over the last 5 or 6 years. Even dating back before that with Joe Johnson, Josh Smith, all those guys were over there as well too. They haven't really stumbled since Coach Bud has been there. And to me, to see this roster kind of maybe going in the direction where they're being blowing things up, you do kind of have to wonder, okay, have they just said, you know what, we're tired of being kind of middle of the pack, if you will, and having that 4 or 5 seed. They got to a 1 seed, what was it, 2-3 years ago now when they won 60 plus games. But other than that, they've just been there and they're consistent making the playoffs, but they don't really do much with that. And it's ironic because you just brought Dwight Howard over there. So if you're trading Kyle Korver, you're taking offers on Paul Millsap, you're taking offers on Tim Hardaway Jr., you're taking offers on Tybo Cephalosha. This signifies to me that they're really just trying to go in another direction. And I don't know that Coach Bud is the reason for all this. I think this is coming from their ownership, which has been much maligned over the last 2 or 3 seasons.
I understand that these moves are going to have to be made at some point. The thing that I think that gets to me, Shaw, and it's much more the criticism that I have for a lot of basketball teams that are stuck in this situation. It always seems like they're sticking their pinky toe in the water, but they're not sticking their whole foot. Eventually, you're going to have to learn how to swim and either go all in on swimming to try to, to get to the other side of the pool, or just sink. Like I look at this Atlanta Hawks team. You got rid of Jeff Teague. How many times have we said that they probably should have gotten rid of Jeff Teague maybe a year or two before they finally did get rid of Jeff Teague? Now you have Dennis Schroeder. You go ahead and you bring in Dwight Howard. But we also been saying maybe the time for Kyle Korver to be that guy. He had 1 or 2 really solid seasons, but the Hawks did not really do a whole lot of anything to help bolster that lineup, so that the dynamic of what Budenholzer is supposed to bring to the table as a coach and offensively make this team better is not certainly helping their cause. I just feel like a lot of the moves that are being made by the Atlanta Hawks, and much like the ones that we're going to be discussing as trade season opens, seems to be these half-hearted attempts at either breaking up their team, the roster, or really putting their best foot forward to establish an identity for a team that rolled the dice in the free agency market and obviously have not yielded the results necessary for them to continue the success that they believe that they should be on.
At the end of the day, it just depends what side of the fence you stand upon. This is a team that has been in the middle of the pack when it comes to Atlanta, but the common mantra in the league is basically either want to be really good or really, really bad. And Atlanta just hasn't been either one of those two things, I think, in the recent years. And some of the teams that we're going to discuss, if we talk about Miami, obviously they have been really good and have won championships, but now they're going to be taking a step back. And you just have to figure out what your roster is going to be looking like. And I think what it boils down to is just kind of the true elite teams in the league right now are just so far ahead of everybody, and they are not going to be slowing down for the next maybe 1 to 2 seasons. If you're looking at a Golden State and the Cleveland, can you really catch those teams with the rosters that you've built? And especially if you're on a team like Atlanta, you're not a desirable destination, maybe because of the mediocrity, if you will, maybe because of the fan base, who knows. But now you bring a guy like Dwight Howard there, who's also not a great recruiter, and getting other free agents to play with him as well too. You just kind of have to wonder where Atlanta is thinking. And it would be great to maybe find out from the ownership kind of what's going on here. And if they do go through with this full-on rebuild and moving on Millsap and all those other guys too, where Atlanta will be after that. But I think, when it really boils down to it, just really depends what side of the fence you stand on.
You're tuned to The Baseline. Kyle Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA and our subject of the breakdown. Trade season opens. Which players might find themselves on the market? So as we look at this particular move with Kyle Korver going to the Cleveland Cavaliers, Shaw, you tell me, how does this move specifically help the Cleveland Cavaliers? And everybody knows across the board, while this might be a solid move because clearly they had no confidence in Mike Dunleavy Jr., albeit I just never saw Mike Dunleavy Jr. as a significant fit for the Cleveland Cavaliers. This basketball team still needs a point guard. So I guess I'm trying to understand, the Griffin logic here in getting a Kyle Korver. Is it the sake of just doing a move to do a move, or is there actually a method behind the madness with this?
Well, they're cutting some roster space as well too. Getting rid of Mo Williams and Dunleavy gives them an extra roster space so that they can acquire Korver and then actually get a point guard. As LeBron has said that as well too. They still need somebody to back up Kyrie Irving. And I think the names that you're definitely going to hear, you're probably going to hear Jarrett Jack. He's rumored to be having workouts, whatever the case may be. Mario Chalmers, supposed to be coming back from his Achilles injury from a season ago as well too. And those are 2 veteran guys who can really come in there and help this roster immediately, especially when it comes to the playoff run. I think the move to get Korver is just to shore up that shooting. He's obviously better than what Dunleavy was being able to give them. I thought Dunleavy might have been a better fit only because he can play make at times. Korver really is just, coming off screens and shooting that three. Plays some acceptable defense for his position as well too. But right now, just think about this Cleveland Cavalier lineup. 4 in, 1 in. I'm sorry, 4 out, 1 in. LeBron can be the guy who's kind of posting up and just facilitating from the post when he has Channing Frye, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Love, and all those guys, J.R. Smith, all around him, ready to shoot the three ball. So for me, if you're looking at that Cavaliers team, a 3-point team that is already second in 3-point attempts, 3-point makes as well, now getting a guy who averages 40% from the 3-point line as well, this Cavaliers team is really be something to be reckoned with, especially in the Eastern Conference.
All right, Shaw. So let's really get down to the nitty gritty with regards to the names that are being thrown out there. I think it's a foregone conclusion. Dwight Howard's name being thrown out there, he's a kind of a recycled assassin, so to speak. Everybody knows what Dwight Howard's intentions were and what the Atlanta Hawks' intentions were in getting Dwight Howard. So the fact that he's already on the trading block doesn't surprise me particularly. But I will say this much, though, for Dwight Howard, that he has exhibited a much better demeanor and attitude. And I think it would behoove the Atlanta Hawks to really think twice about just, going ahead and moving Dwight Howard just simply because this basketball team is subjected itself to mediocrity. With that being said, the fact that Jimmy Butler's name is being thrown out there really, really surprises me. And I feel like if you're the Chicago Bulls, what does it say to your organization knowing that when the time presented itself and decisions had to be made, you chose Jimmy Butler over Derrick Rose? That was an automatic, no-brainer. But now you're talking about moving him because of the fact that it's probably going to make sense. I just think that what happens at times, and when you make these type of decisions to the fan base and to the organization, it just looks so bad. Because even if you do get quality players or even quality picks, the fact that you're allowing him to go and flourish somewhere else simply because the numbers don't add up to the results predicated off of a history that an organization has had in succeeding, I think it's just a bad mix for a basketball player like a Jimmy Butler. For his name to be thrown out there like that, I think at some point it really starts getting to the player because the organization should be doing its part to not make that happen.
Well, there's a lot to discuss, I think, with Chicago Bulls and Jimmy Butler specifically. I'm going to start with the positive, I think, first and foremost. With Jimmy, he's obviously a franchise player. You can build around him. And especially in the recent weeks, 50-point game, he's averaging 40, I think, in the last 3 games or whatever it is. Dwayne Wade has a lot of trust in him and is there primarily because of Butler's greatness and ascension in the NBA as an elite type player. But it seems like there might be something going on with him, within the organization as well too, because it would seem obvious to me. He's like, all right, well, if you're going to rebuild, you can rebuild around Butler, as I just said. But I think they are hesitant because he might have some personality conflicts that don't seem to get along with either his coach or within the organization, and they may be trying to move on from him altogether, which, again, it would be a shame because he's such a talent. You look at this team and what they did, getting Rondo, getting Wade, they said that they weren't going to rebuild. They were going to go ahead and have this veteran-laden team that was going to struggle to shoot the basketball. But if they got into the playoffs, they could become a serious problem from anybody that they played. Now, to see that Butler's name is back on the block amidst the Rondo rumors, you also have to wonder now what that means for Dwayne Wade, because he's got a 1-on-1. So next year, he'd probably be gone as well, too. And then they would really be trying to blow this thing up completely if they did that. But that's the only thing that I can think of when it comes to them wanting to look and potentially trade Jimmy Butler, is because they don't think he's an organizational guy that they can build around.
All right, if you don't believe that he's an organizational person that you can build around, what does that say about the organization itself? I mean, often we keep looking at the player, but why don't we look at the organization? Have we not seen this happen a few times before, where there is a dynamic player who has a personality hitch that just doesn't fit in the fold? I almost feel like the Chicago Bulls, and I'm not going to act like I know what happens with the Chicago Bulls organization themselves. And, I have a crystal ball that, projects everything that internalizes within that. But we have seen this before where basketball players seem to be kidnapped by the Chicago way, so to speak. And because of that, there seems to be a distinct animosity that tends to happen when players who are building their brand and at the same time helping the basketball team succeed goes against the conventional way of thinking for an organization like the Chicago Bulls. They've done it with the great Michael Jordan, and they realized very quickly that they could not afford to do that. Now, unfortunately, they have the luxury of knowing that Jimmy Butler has not won them any chips yet. But at some particular point, if Jimmy Butler puts on a 52-point performance, gets buzzer beater shots, is one of those players who everyone pretty much overlooked through the course of his young career and has ascended himself essentially as to be that dude who wants to put an organization and a team on his back to shoulder them to success. The way that the modern NBA is working does not bode well for an organization like the Chicago Bulls to execute this the way that they're doing it. Because essentially what I think that you should be thinking about is, if you're going to blow it up, you blow it up moving Rondo and Wade before you even entertain the idea of moving Butler.
Well, I agree. And I think, we're at a situation where we can only speculate what's going on within the organization, because as analysts and media types, we're looking at Jimmy Butler and saying, this is a guy you can obviously build a team around. He can be the centerpiece of your organization, centerpiece of your franchise. If we're comparing him like we did weeks ago to Kawhi Leonard, and Kawhi Leonard is obviously the centerpiece of the San Antonio Spurs now, there's no difference here, I think, in comparing him and Jimmy Butler. Butler is a guy who's doing it on both sides of the basketball. He's become a great playmaker, not just a scorer and defender, but he creates other shots for his teammates, and he can hit clutch shots as well too. I don't see anything wrong with him, from the outside looking in. It has to be something that's going on internally where that organization isn't comfortable with him being their guy.
All right, where would you see an ideal location for a person like a Jimmy Butler to be moved to? And keep in mind that when I ask this question, Shaw, this question emanates from the idea that whatever the Chicago Bulls decide to do with Jimmy Butler, it's more about the fact that they are trying to get more for what Jimmy Butler is obviously worth at this moment in time, than more so of what an organization is willing to give. Because I think that if you have a player like a Jimmy Butler, you should be giving the farm. But that's obviously predicated on the fact that that organization has a plan in place so that they know that they can keep Jimmy Butler even when his contract is up.
Yeah, well, he's got a couple years left on his deal, so I think that's what prohibits him from being a real, I guess, player in terms of deciding his own destination, as some players would like to be, especially in their contract year. He's going to just kind of have to go with the flow, and Chicago's going to be trying to get the best haul they potentially can if they actually were to move him. And in terms of destinations, it's the same kind of old teams that always pop up. I think Boston would be extremely interested. They were extremely interested in the summer and trying to get him. Minnesota has been trying to get that veteran guy who can potentially put them to that next level and get them into the playoffs. Don't know if that's where they seem to have enough young pieces where they can make it work. I think a team like OKC would be all in and trying to pair him alongside Russell Westbrook and things of that nature. For me, I think Butler wants to go to a situation where they can still win and win immediately. I don't think he wants to be in the long rebuild, and maybe that's even part of the problem that Chicago may be having with it. So I think those three teams stand out to me as potential destinations, because again, he can play the 2, he can play the 3. So there's not too many teams out there where he couldn't go in there and fit and be a key member immediately. I mean, even think of a team like Charlotte. They don't have that many assets per se, but I mean, imagine having Kemba Walker, Batum, and Jimmy Butler. That would be very, very formidable, especially in the Eastern Conference. So all those teams would be very interested, and he's a name that if it really is available, you're going to have at least 25 teams knocking down the door of the Chicago Bulls.
Why not a team like the New Orleans Pelicans, Shaw?
Why not?
Why not? Why not a team like what would you feel like? Why does it seem like we can mention some of these teams like the Charlotte Hornets? And I know that you said that one of the main reasons, the predicate reason here, is the fact that Jimmy Butler doesn't want to be through a rebuilding process. But I'd be hard pressed to think that if Jimmy Butler had an opportunity to play next to the unibrow, that he would not be an all in on the idea and the possibility that those two can help turn around that Pelican franchise. So Why would not an organization like the Pelicans, who has really been behind the 8 ball when it comes to anything regarding deals, right? They've been given the shaft so many times in the last 10 years or so, with moves that they have attempted to make and deals that they have tried to do. And I can guarantee you that if they don't get this right very soon, they will not have the unibrow. But again, sometimes by even doing something of this kind of magnitude, trying to do whatever you can to put yourself in the mix, in the conversation, bodes well for how a fan base perceives the Pelicans and exactly what the mindset would be for an Anthony Davis and his ability to go out and say, hey, do whatever you can to set up an opportunity for me to sit down and talk to Jimmy Butler, because I think we can do big things for this basketball team if you go get me that player.
Well, I think it would be a great pairing, and I don't doubt that New Orleans would be interested. I mean, they've already been linked to Paul Millsap as well too, so they clearly want to make a move. And Millsap technically plays the same position as AD does, so they're willing to move AD out of his comfortable 4 slot and make him play more center, which he said he doesn't mind per se, but they're willing to do that if they can get Millsap. So I think if Butler's available, New Orleans would be very interested. It's just a matter of what would you give them back? What could Chicago take back that's viable to them? You have to give them some draft picks, but then if you're Chicago, you're probably asking for Drew Holiday back, maybe asking for Buddy Hield as well. Some combination of that. Obviously, they'd love to get rid of Tyreek Evans, but I don't think anyone's taking on that contract. So I think some combination of Hield and Holiday and a pick, maybe that gets it done for Butler. But you just kind of see what really Chicago is trying to do to get in return for Jimmy.
All right, Shaw, let's go ahead and move things along. One other particular name that you identified in conversations of people that should be considered or already been talked about being considered, Wesley Matthews of the Dallas Mavericks. And we've talked about Wesley Matthews. He's an Iron Man type of guy. The fact that he came off of the ACL injury has been more than heroic in many respects. The fact that he showed loyalty to the Portland Trailblazers fan base and the Portland Trailblazer organization. And realistically, he's been that kind of guy, even amidst of what happened with the Dallas Mavericks with Mark Cuban and what took place with DeAndre Jordan, that Wesley Matthews decided to stick out, stay with the contract, even though they lost out in getting DeAndre Jordan. And he has been a mainstay guy. He's been a glue guy. I think that goes far, a long ways for any basketball team, whether you're winning or losing, to have that kind of guy. The fact that he is actually being talked about as far as trade rumors go, which to me is more realistic than guys like Jimmy Butler and Dwight Howard. But the fact that he is possibly available on the market says what to any basketball team that should be considering Wesley Matthews?
Well, it says more than anything else that Dallas finally realizes that they're not going to be a playoff team this year. They made some acceptable strides. I guess you can call 11-26 acceptable from where they were. Dirk is back and playing at an adequate rate. Bogut has come out and said that he can't wait to get out of there in the next few months. So he's probably going to be the first one to go, when it comes down to this Mavericks organization. But if you're a team on the outside looking in, you're like, you know what, it's time to go in and pillage whatever little assets they may have available for them. And Wesley Matthews can help a lot of teams out there with the 3-point shooting and obviously being a 3-and-D guy, and being just a guy who's so tenacious and it's a locker room guy too. That's going to fit anywhere. So the team that sticks out to me that if they can make it happen any way, shape, or form and figuring out how to do it would be the Clippers. They've been trying to answer that small forward position for years now. And I think Wesley Matthews would be amazing if they could get him over there in that organization. But again, he's a guy, like I said, who can go anywhere, and he's going to work hard and play hard, and he's going to give the Mavs all the business that they can handle next time he plays them if he were to get traded from them.
I like how you use the word plunder and pillage. I feel like you have that Game of Thrones itch in you, right?
Always.
Can the series, the season premiere, come any sooner for you? I mean, seriously.
No, it cannot. It's not coming out till June too, man. So it's frustrating.
I'm gonna have to probably go and yank the theme music and play it every single time that you throw that out there. Which, by the way, you have been on a verbal conquest as of late. I just want to let you know that. Ornery, plunder, and pillage.
Well, I think you got the props, on Twitter with one of our listeners with besmirch. So I think you got the vocabulary going right now, dog. I'm just in here trying to follow your footsteps, brother.
Oh, whatever, man. Besmirch, that was a desperation pull, if nothing else.
Pull that one out, huh?
Yeah, I didn't pull it out. I didn't pull it out as badly as Swaggy Pete did last week.
I be smoking.
But yes. Easy, go there. 2 times.
The gyration shot around the nation. Swaggy Pete.
I be smoking. That's what I
gotta love it.
You gotta love him.
You gotta love it. Okay, Shaw. Final thoughts with reference to trade season opening. Which do you feel is the most realistic move that can be done? I rarely do we ever see situations like blockbuster moves happen well before the trade deadline, and more so well before we even get to NBA All-Star Weekend. So if we're looking at these guys, minus the Kyle Korver situation, which would be the most realistic that you think can definitely take place? My money is obviously going to be on Wesley Matthews, But again, to your point, you brought up some excellent points with reference to the Atlanta Hawks and with reference to the Chicago Bulls. I believe that the Wesley Matthews situation, and that we didn't throw this out there because I don't think that it's going to be a trade as much as I think it may possibly be a release. Rajon Rondo. And if Rajon Rondo gets released, there may be a LeBrondo love fest happening because I would hate to see that. You know me. I would hate to see that. But if there's anyone that's been calling for, we need a point guard, it's been LeBron James. And he is a point guard. So I'm just saying.
Well, that'd be very interesting because, like I said, I think when we had this conversation on Rondo a couple of weeks ago, was Wade and Butler have both been, ominously quiet about Rondo. But I'm sure LeBron will call his buddy, and say, "Hey, D Wade, what's good? What's going on with this Rondo dude? How's he been in Chicago?" And LeBron would, if it's been any type of, incidents where it really has been Rondo's fault, LeBron's going to have that on his roster. They won't bring him in there even to be a backup. I don't think he's in the habit of trying to change guys per se. He likes ready-made products and guys that he sees, okay, they can kind of fit into the culture in which he's fostered, especially in each stop that he's been in both Miami and Cleveland in his two stops. So for me, I don't know that would work simply because I think Wade might have some negative things to say about Rondo, but they're obviously an organization that needs a backup point guard, and if Rondo does become available, well, I think that's the role he's going to have to accept because I don't think he's going to get starters minutes anywhere at this point of his career. And it's really, really funny. Our old friends over at CNLS and Larry Russell said, I think it was 3 years ago that Rondo would be out of the league in 5 years. And at this point, it started to look like that might really come to pass. And that's ironic because I thought there was no way a guy who could put up a triple-double at any given stop or any given moment could be out of the league in 5 years the way that Rondo seems to be heading, man. So that's crazy to me.
Well, let me put a correction. Not a correction, but let me put this to separate the idea, the thought process behind that, because while I tend to agree with that assessment, it wasn't because of talent for Rajon Rondo. It's because Rajon Rondo has just made some really bad decisions. And the way that he handles the relationships that he has with the organizations is very poor. I don't think that there's any question that Rajon Rondo, when playing with his teammates, and here's the thing, I think that there may be a possible conspiracy theory that could actually come from this. Wherever Dwayne Wade goes, there always seems to be players that wind up finding themselves over on LeBron's team shortly thereafter.
Really?
Okay. I don't, it's kind of like contagion. You know what I mean? Like Wade is probably only there in Chicago to see if he can infiltrate and infect the players that might want to get out of Chicago to go play for the Cleveland Cavaliers. That's how Wade and LeBron do their recruiting. That's just my crazy thought process. But in reference to Rajon Rondo, having the type of year that he had with the Sacramento Kings under the lunacy direction of George Karl, you mean to tell me that Larry Russell and those guys were assessing that Rajon Rondo would not see himself playing in the NBA in another few more seasons? That to me is the difference. If they're talking about that in context with the fact that he does not have good relationships with the coaches, he is a cancer to an organization that likes to keep teams and players in line, I completely agree with you, because there are only so many players or places that you can go to where you can be who you are and get away with it. And Rajo has that complex. He has that personality complex that if it don't fit right, it ain't going to be there, okay? But it's not because of his talent. And I think there's already one alpha dog on that basketball team, and that's LeBron James. And even Rondo knows that. So I find it, if Rondo says, I will do it, I don't think that it will be as bad as what we continually have seen over the last couple of seasons with his stints in Sacramento and now here with Chicago.
Yeah, I mean, but the thing for me is, for what they do, what Cleveland does,
right?
He doesn't fit because they need somebody who can shoot. So that would really have to be the situation where he has to have the ball in his hands. And if LeBron and Kyrie are out there, well, those guys need the ball in their hands. So Rondo, even as a backup point guard, he's not quintessential in that way because he can't shoot the basketball. And that's why guys like Jarrett Jack and Mario Chalmers, who shoot the three ball very well, they seem to fit in Cleveland's system a little bit better than Rondo does. But again, he still needs to be released or traded one way or the other out of Chicago, see how that situation plays itself out, to kind of get back on track, in terms of who I see potentially moving. Who I think some guys who are definitely going to go. I think it's the old names you hear. Rudy Gay, he has to leave. Something has to happen there in Sacramento. Nunes Noel has to leave Philadelphia. I think Greg Monroe is going to have to leave Milwaukee as well too. And then I'm not too sure. With Wojo making the report about Paul Millsap, it would seem like okay, Atlanta's going to be very close into doing something with him as well too. But if they decided to change course and maybe play this season now, especially since Atlanta, as the recording of the show, has come back and taken the lead in the Southeast Division, maybe they're like, okay, well, Korver was enough for right now. Let's see how the rest of this season plays out. I don't know, but those are the guys I think definitely have to be moved on before the season's end.
Well, let the plundering and the pillaging begin in the cities of Chicago and Atlanta, if that is the situation and the circumstance. Oh, and let's not forget Dallas as well, too. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Breakdown. Time now for The Drop. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of The Baseline NBA podcast. This week on The Drop, we got our segment, man. Who you got? You can get with this, you can get with that. And this and that, this week specifically, is a good one. Give me props, Shaw. You certainly know how to keep our listeners like flustered and frustrated and pontificating.
Ooh,
you like that one, right? It's been a while since I threw that one out there. Pontificating about the possibilities. If you are starting a franchise, and given what we have seen recently from the Greek freak, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and what we have already seen in the very young, Roy-like style gameplay of the big cat, Karl Anthony Towns, the question is, who you got?
I don't know. Yeah, and I think that's why.
I don't think the purpose of this segment, Shaw, was for you to say, I don't know.
I think this is one of those situations where when we had the off-air meeting, if you will, determining which two guys we're going to discuss. We're looking at this from, if you're building a franchise, who can help you first and foremost and take you the longest when it comes down to potentially winning championships, making the playoffs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think a lot of things too that are considered in this too is who can sell tickets and all of that. So Giannis would have the ability to do those things, I think, maybe first and foremost, because wing guys and guys like that who are out there on the perimeter a little bit, although he's not a great shooter, just seem to sell easier and they're more relatable. But Karl Anthony Towns is just such a special player, I think, on all levels, especially a big guy who can shoot the three. He can handle the ball. He played some point guard when he was younger as well, and and just does everything. And so very well spoken, is gauged in the community. You couldn't ask for two better players, two better people in general to start a franchise with. So when you're breaking down their skill set, Giannis, again, I think because of his ability to guard so many different people at his position, being 6'11", can guard basically 1 through 5. For me, maybe I think I'm leaning that way a little bit. But again, Karl Anthony Towns, again, is still very versatile at the 4 and 5 position. And again, is a great defender as well, too. So for me, I think I'm leaning Giannis, but you could very easily sway me. So go ahead and make your case.
You want me to make my case for Karl Anthony Towns? Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, go ahead, do that.
All right, let me go ahead and make my case for Karl Anthony Towns. Very rarely in this NBA do you find someone come into the league and essentially take a small market franchise. And when I say small market franchise, I'm talking about the Minnesota Timberwolves. The last time that this was done was the big ticket, essentially. And they've had a litany of basketball players, go through that franchise. But Karl Anthony Towns had something within him that I think we were questioning at the time. Will it translate to him being successful in the NBA when he came out of the draft, when he came from Kentucky? And I think the thing that stands out to me is the fact that he knows that he's a big man and he plays like he's a big man. And sometimes when a big goes out there and establishes the type of numbers that Karl Anthony Towns establishes, some of those players, you can tell they depend heavily on the point guard. They depend heavily on the offensive sets being called. Karl Anthony Towns looks like the kind of basketball player that he can grasp the concept of playing the kind of basketball that is necessary to win basketball games. He did that, and that's partly part of the reason why a head coach like Tom Thibodeau is electing to say, I want to coach that basketball team, because of Karl Anthony Towns. With Giannis Antetokounmpo, it took a while. It took a very long while, partly because his game was more international based. And even to this day, it's taken more of Giannis within himself to figure out who he is and what he's capable of being to a basketball franchise than what we're already seeing from Karl Anthony Towns. And these are the type of things that don't get measured by just any mere statistic that you can find, which is part of the reason why I think a lot of people lean towards Karl Anthony Towns as being their startup player. Because even when he came in out of the University of Kentucky, and we've seen the University of Kentucky players, they're great on film, but are they long-term solutions to what they want to see become a successful NBA basketball player for a successful franchise? And that's not always been the case. But with Karl Anthony Towns, you do see that. And I feel like that could slightly give him the edge over Giannis Antetokounmpo, even though Antetokounmpo measures himself a lot further ahead as far as talent goes and what he could potentially bring to a basketball team.
I mean, I think that's very well stated, and for me, the only counterpoint I'd have to that is I think Giannis has been in the league longer. So he came in at a much younger age than Karl Anthony Towns. Giannis is 22 now. Karl Anthony Towns is 21. So Giannis is 3 years ahead, roughly, in terms of his NBA experience and playing career, and it's taken a little bit of time to grow into himself and grow into his role. And I don't think he was given the keys to the kingdom in Milwaukee immediately. People weren't sure about his talent. I think Karl Anthony Towns, although obviously very good, they were like, listen, go out here and do your thing. And they were giving him the ball and asking him to be that guy immediately. Giannis had to earn his right a little bit, had to earn minutes. I think he was coming off the bench for the better part of his rookie season. And then again, just, flourish because you started to see the talent that he has on within his ability. Again, not a great shooter. Karl Anthony Towns, I think, has all the metrics when it comes to overall shooting, especially from the outside. But Giannis, just with his ability to create, his ability to switch on defense, block shots, just like Cat does. And to me, it's crazy. As we record this show right now, Giannis averages more blocks than Karl Anthony Towns, averages more steals than Karl Anthony Towns does. Has more points. So for me, that's where I'm like, okay, if you're out there being able to do all of these things, and when we had Adam Joseph on our podcast a couple of weeks ago talking about, okay, when was the last time you saw a guy lead his team in every single statistical category, and that was LeBron James, and he's playing a LeBron James-like role right now at age 22 for the Milwaukee Bucks, doing everything. Remember, LeBron couldn't really shoot either to begin his career. And Giannis, now we saw him hit a game winner against the New York Knicks on a fadeaway jump shot. So that part of his game is really starting to come along. And for me, that's why I want to give it to him. And I'm really leaning towards that, because that overall versatility, and just because, again, being a wing guy just gives him a little bit more flexibility to do more things on the basketball court.
One of the things that stand out to me for Giannis Antetokounmpo and Karl Anthony Towns is their learning curve. And they're both going in opposite directions in relation to the way that they play their positions. Karl Anthony Towns is doing the things that, as a big man, as he continues into his NBA career, he will eventually get better at the things that Giannis Antetokounmpo is partly already established himself in doing, and vice versa for Giannis. I think if Giannis Antetokounmpo emphasizes a little bit better, not just shooting the basketball, but using his size and establishing himself in the low post, much like how Karl Anthony Towns does, both of these guys will have a complete game, probably at the apex, similar to the same ages. It's frightening. Can you imagine if they were both on the same basketball team?
Well, no, because that's a nightmare for anybody else that you can think of. But looking at numbers this season, just the season alone, because if you would have asked me this last year, I don't know which way I would have went. But I think, seeing Giannis finish the season with all those triple doubles, but seeing Karl Anthony Towns, being as great as he was, I might have lent more towards Cat. But seeing Giannis come out here and do what he's been doing at the beginning of this season, has just kind of pushed me over the edge and given me the confidence to say, okay, I'd rather have him. And although I wouldn't, necessarily be upset if I had Cat as well. But usage percentage, they're both comparable: 28.7 for Giannis, 27.3, for Karl Anthony Towns. Again, the points are 24 for Giannis, 21. Rebounds, 11, or almost 12 for Cat, 9 for Giannis, 5.7 assists for Giannis, 2.9 for Karl Anthony Towns. going all over the map when it comes to that. But the effective field goal percentage actually is towards Giannis right now, and that's because he takes more twos than Karl Anthony Towns because Cat can't shoot the three ball. But again, when he's out there shooting that three, he's only shooting it at 31% right now, and Giannis isn't that far behind. But he just doesn't take as many as Cat does. So for me, when you're looking at that, I think the metrics kind of lead towards Giannis a little bit as well too. And what's funny though, because I still think Karl Anthony Towns has a better overall roster that can get to be a better team when it's all said and done. I would take that core, Minnesota's core, over Milwaukee's core, and I love what Jabari is being able to do. But we just talked about earlier in the show how Greg Monroe may not be a part of this roster much longer. Chris Middleton was a great basketball player, but again, and I would take Andrew Wiggins over Chris Middleton, twice on Sunday, if you will. So to me, to see what Giannis is doing with a roster that I still don't think is as good as Minnesota's roster is, gives me the confidence to say that he's going to be the better overall player when it all is said and done.
Will he be the better overall player, the better overall leader in comparison to Karl Anthony Towns? I'm just curious from what you've seen in the demeanor.
Now, that is a great question. I think Cat has exhibited the ability to be an extremely confident person and leader in the locker room. And I think Giannis might still even be growing into that role. And I don't know that he is the guy right now on that team. And I think they have some great veterans, obviously with being led by Jason Kidd as a coach, but a guy like Jason Terry is there as well too, kind of helping those guys along in their practices. And then I think the same thing, even Middleton at this point in his career now, he's probably more of a voice than Giannis is. I think Cat has come in there and had to be the voice on that roster. But as we've alluded to many times as well too, Coach Tibbs wants somebody else to help Karl Anthony Towns on the Minnesota Timberwolves team. They want another veteran guy and a person to kind of be the voice out there to kind of get some of the things that Thibodeau is trying to express. And they really are missing, and I guess Thibodeau wouldn't know what it is, but they're really missing KG, I think, in the locker room and his presence and what he was able to do. But if you're asking me right now who's the better overall leader, I think in those intangibles, I definitely give the edge to Karl Anthony Towns.
I will say this much. Giannis Antetokounmpo made a profound statement with the game-winning shot just the other day against the New York Knicks. That to me tells me that one, Jason Kidd is starting to believe that Giannis can be that guy. He wants to get him the ball. Even if you have Chris Middleton and Jabari Parker, I think Giannis is putting himself in a position where he wants it to be known that make me an option in whatever situation that it calls for. And I think that's going to speak volumes down the road. But to your point, I agree with you. Now, excitement. Who do you think is going to fill up the seats better? Giannis or the Cat?
Well, as I was saying earlier, I really do believe that wing guys just have more marketability overall in the NBA. Giannis is a guy who will dunk it from anywhere. Seemingly, when he should be laying things up, he'll turn that thing over. And I saw him do some left-handed dunks. He took off, as you mentioned, in that Knicks game, took off from damn near the free throw line. He had a Space Jam dunk that people were calling out on Twitter the other day as well too. And Cat, although very, very sneakily agile and quick, and he can get up as well too. For me, I just think Giannis brings a little bit more excitement to the arena on a regular basis, simply because, again, he's just doing so much on the perimeter, where Cat is on outside a little bit, but doing a lot of his damage on the block, and that just is not as exciting. But again, I wouldn't go wrong either way. But Giannis gives me the edge, I think, in a little bit when it comes to marketability.
I've been a staunch believer of Giannis Antetokounmpo, even when he was a fledgling, so to speak, with the Milwaukee Bucks. I just felt like the way that his game could translate very easily on the open court, there would have to have been somebody willing to roll the dice and give him the amount of playing time that was needed for him to start to flourish. So I always believed in that. I think the one thing that I question, especially, 2 years ago when we were talking about Karl Anthony Towns in the NBA draft, between him and Jahlil Okafor, is would Karl Anthony Towns fit in Minnesota as much as maybe Jahlil Okafor would fit in Minnesota? Because I think with Karl Anthony Towns, he could establish himself better maybe with the Los Angeles Lakers or maybe even with the Philadelphia 76ers, more so than I believed him establishing himself with the Minnesota Timberwolves. Either way, Karl Anthony Towns, I believe, is one of those box office players, unfortunately, in an era where his game doesn't seem to translate to the type of excitement that people enamor themselves with what they see and perceive in social media and also through the NBA. So Giannis is definitely one of those dudes. He's also made a significant case by entering into the slam dunk contest. So he's not afraid to showcase his versatility, and the fact that he has a little international flair to him as well too makes him a viable seat grabber. Right. Someone that you can punch a ticket, you're going to get some kind of a show on the basketball court. And the fact that he has the basketball in his hands quite often through the course of a basketball game, there is likely that he is going to make something exciting happen. Final thoughts, Shaw. It sounds like to me you're on Team Giannis.
Yeah, I think I am, but even to back up Cat a little bit too, remember he's the first big man to win the skills competition, going out there and beating some guards out there at All-Star Weekend a season ago. So, again, he's so talented and versatile himself as well. But again, yeah, I am definitely leaning towards Giannis as a guy who I would build my franchise around at this point. Plays both sides of the basketball. I mean, they both do, but just a little bit more versatile defensively, and has a great grasp and concept of the game as well. So for me, I'm going that way. But I'd love to hear what our fans and listeners have to say as well too, because I think this is a conversation where there is no wrong answer. But I'd love to hear what people had to say and why they picked that player.
So who do you got? Definitely give us your thoughts and comments. Be sure to hit us up on the Twitter at NBA Baseline. Team Giannis or Team Cat? Either way, you can't go wrong, because both franchises certainly have a very bright future ahead. But whether it's my team, Shaw's team, or maybe even your NBA 2K team, if you've got a Giannis or you got a Cat, I'd expect to see you playing in the NBA Finals very, very soon. You're tuned to The Baseline. Kyle Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Drop.
Coast to coast.
Coast to coast.
Time now to go coast to coast discussing the news in the association. You ready to rock and roll, Mr. Shaw?
Absolutely, man. Let's ride.
All right. All-Star voting is in effect, and the first ballot results are in. And of course, the king claimeth his throne, and right behind him his sidekick, who rides upon a horse, Kyrie Irving. Are you surprised by the fact that LeBron and Kyrie Irving are the the All-Star vote getters so far?
No surprise for me. LeBron and Kyrie are the two best players, I think, on their teams, and two best players in the Eastern Conference. And when it comes down to that as well, so LeBron leading and Kyrie leading, no problems for me at that. But it's that Western Conference has me a little bit perturbed, my man.
Why does it have you perturbed, Shaw?
Well, Zaza Pachulia is a starter right now. Then that to me makes no sense. Ahead of guys like Kawhi Leonard, ahead of DMC, his home country, giving him all those votes, especially with all the prime time that he's getting playing on the Golden State Warriors alongside Durant and Curry and even Klay Thompson. This guy, again, I like him and all, but he has 439,000 plus votes. He's even beating Klay Thompson, a teammate of his, even beating Draymond Green. How is this possible? That makes no sense.
Let me tell you something. The reason why that this is possible is when you start gyrating your hips. This is all Ja's part. You see, he started this phenomenon, right? Now everybody, Victor Oladipo trying to cop him some votes out in OKC. And now we see Swaggy P pulling this stunt as well, too. All this took was an internal joke from Jaja Pachulia, and now all of a sudden he's Magic Mike's, stunt double in the NBA, okay?
Well, you should go ahead and make a meme of that, Zaza Pachulia and Magic Mike, and see how many hits we get on that, brother.
Hey, listen, we'll post up the graphics.
You do it.
That might be a next who you got. Jaja Pachulia or Channing Tatum. How about that one? All right, out in Los Angeles, Blake Griffin still out, no timetable. I don't know if I'm supposed to be surprised by this or concerned by this if you're a Los Angeles Clipper fan.
I think it's concerning because the Clippers just haven't been playing the greatest of basketball as of late. Got a win over the weekend, so that's obviously great. But they definitely need him to be out there and taking some pressure off DeAndre Jordan, and then obviously giving Chris Paul another target out there as an all-star guy in Blake Griffin.
All right, out in Charlotte, Nicholas Batum is expected to be out 1 to 2 weeks. Big blow to the Charlotte Hornets, who are obviously still in contention in the Southeast Division.
Yeah, as we alluded to a little bit earlier too, they were leading the Southeast for a little while. Atlanta since has caught them, and they slipped. And without Batum, who's playing great basketball, rebounding and assisting at an immense rate, allowing Kemba to play off the ball and just doing so much for that Charlotte organization and team. With him being out, they're gonna have to rely on MKG and Spencer Hawes and guys like that too to try to pick up the slack. And to me, that's just not what they want to do. So hopefully Batum can be back as quick as possible.
And finally, Shaw, I'm not sure why this one is actually being thrown up in our Coast to Coast bulletin, but maybe just for kicks and giggles, it should be. Kenyon Martin and Tim Thomas are expected to be on the pay-per-view event between Chris Brown and Soulja Boy. I think my only question is, where's George Karl in all of this?
Right? He should at least be the referee, or he should get in there, or maybe he can have another auxiliary bout with Kenyon Martin after that's all over.
He could come in like in the WWE as part of the authority with the table.
Oh yeah, whatever, whoever was that was Bobby Heenan. He can come in there like that, he can slam the chair over his head in favor of Tim Thomas. Because ironically, didn't he coach both of those guys? Tim Thomas played some time in Milwaukee as well too.
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
So it'd be a lot of fun, to see George Karl come out there, out of the way. But again, this is boxing, I guess, not wrestling. But to see these two guys,
you can never tell these days, especially when it's a pay-per-view event.
This is very true, and especially if 50 Cent is the guy who's going to be organizing it. So a lot of fun out there in the NBA right now. I didn't know Kenyon and Tim Thomas had this everlasting beef, so it'll be great to see this, I guess, go down for some, I guess you say, for kicks and giggles, if you will.
Oh man, you gotta love former NBA players. They always like to spice up the party a little bit, whether it's something that they say or something that was never said that then finally gets revealed. And then what more can we say about Chris Brown and Soulja Boy? Maybe they just continue to do all the talking, because it always leads to some kind of beef or some kind of fight, whether it be in the nightclub or on, what is it now, Twitter? Was it Snapchat or Twitter? I have no idea.
Instagram. Karuchi.
Exactly, Instagram. Oh my goodness. Unbelievable. There you have it, man. Coast to coast discussing all of the topics that happen in the association. Another great show on tap, Shaw. Awesome stuff. Breaking down the possible trade possibilities as we start to approach closer to the trade deadline and NBA All-Star Weekend, where a lot of the action does tend to happen, not for the players, but probably for the GMs of each of these organizations. And then, of course, who you got, man? Wow, what a great topic. Giannis or the cat? Love it. So great stuff all around, man.
Absolutely, and I hope everybody did enjoy the show. I mean, we had a great time doing it and putting it out there as well, so we hope we get some feedback. Make sure you tweet us with who you got, Giannis or Cat. We'd love to hear your feedback on that, and also let us know who you think is going to be the first guy to get traded out, after the Kyle Korver move this season.
And you can't use Kyle Korver. Kyle Korver does not count.
No, he's done. Yeah, that's a wrap. So, our fans are intelligent. They're going to know what the deal is with that. But as always, make sure you give us a rating on iTunes and Stitcher and all those outlets. We need those to move up in our rankings, so we'd appreciate it. And we'll shout you out on the next show for sure.
Definitely. For the Baseline, Kyle Lee, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. You know we do. And we'll catch up with you next time.